This is Regenerative Skills, the podcast helping you to learn the skills and solutions to create an abundant and connected future. I'm your host, Oliver Gaucher. New Society Publishers is your gateway to a regenerative future. They're not just about books, they're about transforming lives and communities through the power of knowledge and action. Their mission is simple: to inspire and empower individuals to create a more just, sustainable, and compassionate world. They envision a future where every person has the tools and resources they need to thrive in harmony with nature, where communities are resilient and interconnected, and where equity and justice are fundamental principles guiding our collective journey. If you subscribe right now to their newsletter at newsociety.com, you'll be the first to receive sneak peeks at new content and get discounts on upcoming title releases. You'll even get an exclusive discount code on your first purchase of books, ebooks, or audiobooks. So sign up today at newsociety.com. Hey there, everybody, and welcome back. So after 8 years of interviewing people in the regeneration sector, it's become clear to me that knowledge is not as valuable as experience. Gathering facts and concepts and theories is great up to a point, but until you put those ideas into practice, it's impossible to know if those ideas clash with your reality or require adaptation to what's really going on the ground. For this reason, I was excited to see that Don Hall, who has worked in the Transition Towns movement in various capacities for 16 years now, has come out with a new book titled The Regeneration Handbook: Transform Yourself to Transform the World. Don also holds a master's in environmental leadership from Naropa University, a certification in permaculture design from the Central Rocky Mountain Permaculture Institute, and is currently the training coordinator for the Transition Network. Now, you can find accounts of much of his work and his learning at his website and blog at evolutionarychange.org. In this episode, a lot of what we explore revolves around the International Transition Network, how it started, and how it's grown into a movement since the early 2000s. We go into Don's practical experience building the transition movement in both Colorado and Florida, some of the shared priorities of those communities that formed the basis of initiatives and unity that was formed, and how others can participate in creating these kinds of programs in their own communities. We also get into related topics like how transition is as much an internal process as an external community one, and the skills that Don believes that we need to relearn in order to live in close-knit communities the way that almost everyone used to in recent history. Now, before we get into the interview, I'm happy to announce that my good friends at New Society Publishers are offering a listener giveaway of the Regeneration Handbook. And all you need to do to be eligible to win a copy for free is to send me a direct message through the Regenerative Skills Discord server saying that you would like a copy. And I'll announce the winner on the channel 1 week from the release of this episode. So if you live anywhere in the US or Canada, you could win a physical copy of the book. And if you live anywhere else, we'll send you a digital copy. And if you're not already a member of our Discord community, you can sign up for free on our homepage at regenerativeskills.com or through our bio on Instagram. And I really look forward to having these books sent out very soon. So now let's get into the discussion with Don Hall. Welcome, Don. It's great to talk to you again. We had a brief chat a while ago when your last book came out, in Stories of Transition, and I'm really excited today to explore your new book, The Regeneration Handbook. But before we jump into all the things that you cover in the book, can you tell us about your personal background and what has given you the experience to write a handbook like this?
Yeah, well, I've been involved in various kinds of activism since I was in college 25 years ago now. I started out working with the Students for Free Tibet and got involved in the anti-war and anti-globalization movements of the early 2000s, started to get more involved with environmental issues, but really became increasingly disenchanted by what I call conventional political activism. And I think things like demonstrations and direct actions and policy proposals are important, but they're not enough. They don't necessarily address the root causes. They don't create new, more just and sustainable systems. And so I was seeking something that was more, aligned with my own personal values and what I believe that these times needed. And I kind of stumbled over it when I was in graduate school, Naropa University here in Boulder in 2007, 2008. I came across the permaculture movement. Started living in an intentional community and learned about that whole world. And I came across the transition towns movement just as it was starting up here in the US. And actually, as part of my master's studies, interned as education and outreach coordinator with Transition Colorado, which was the first official transition initiative in North America. And then after 2 years working with them, after I graduated, I decided to move back to Florida, where I had lived before, and start a local initiative there called Transition Sarasota. Did that for 6.5 years, paid my dues, learned how the transition process works on the ground, and then was hired by Transition US, first to be co-directors with the original executive director, Caroline Staten. And then when she took a well-deserved retirement, became its sole executive director. And through all of that, through working at the local, state, national levels, learned a lot about this movement, this way of organizing, not just transition towns, but learning from all sorts of related movements and key thinkers and stories of success, and decided to write this book. Now, currently, I work for the International Transition Network as training coordinator. So I've been extremely fortunate to be able to experience this movement at all different levels. And I think that makes me somewhat qualified to have something to say about it.
Well, let's go deeper into the transition network then and how it started and how it's grown to an international movement in the time since you got excited about it.
Yeah. So it really started in 2005, 2006 in England with a longtime permaculture teacher named Rob Hopkins, who moved with his family to Totnes, England, and started Transition Town Totnes with a number of colleagues. And they were mainly looking at how could they transition their one small town beyond fossil fuels to local resilience. But their work was so inspiring and successful in those early years, doing so many different types of projects, all sorts of things around growing their local food system. They created an alternative currency. They started a community-owned renewable energy company, and many, many other things besides that people started to notice. And, first towns elsewhere in England and then all over the world, started to mimic the transition approach, which was very novel at the time and I believe still is, a little bit less so because a lot of movements have started kind of borrowing and copying things from transition. But very unique, very promising. And out of that, Rob wrote the Transition Handbook in 2008, which was a bestseller. And that really helped to spread the movement around the world. Around that time, the International Transition Network was formed as a support organization for the movement, and transition trainings started to be offered, now taught hundreds of times around the world. And yeah, the movement has grown to about, we estimate around 1,000 communities in 50 countries worldwide who are, every local initiative is somewhat unique. That's been one of the key principles of transition since the beginning, is that local initiatives need to respond to local conditions, local needs, local opportunities, and the interests of the people who are involved. It needs to harness the energy that's already there. So every transition initiative is a little bit different, but we're all bound together by a kind of similar understanding of our current historical moment, by common vision of a relocalized, regenerative future, and by a kind of common set of principles and organizing model.
Yeah. And so based on this, I guess, template on creating transition in someone's own town, what sort of experiences, what did you learn from working on that both in Colorado and in Florida? Were there major differences in the issues that were most important to that community that people wanted to work on?
To some extent, I think that time, the late aughts and the early 2010s, there was a lot of momentum, I think, throughout the country and around the world around local food systems. Michael Pollan's book, The Omnivore's Dilemma, had come out. There was the documentary film Food Inc., and that propelled a lot of energy around local food systems, growing your own food, permaculture. And I found that to be the case both in Colorado and in Florida. And I think it makes a lot of sense. Food is a very natural place to get started. If we want to create true security and resilience for the future, it's the natural place to start. What do we need more than food? And our current industrialized system of agriculture is very destructive, adds a lot of carbon emissions to the climate crisis, and is extremely fragile and vulnerable to collapse. And so I think food is a natural place to start. I also think it's a natural place to start because it's something that everybody can do. We may not, as individuals or as small volunteer groups or local communities, be able to build vast renewable energy infrastructure, but we can plant a garden. We can learn how to preserve and share the harvest with others. We can support local farmers and build a stronger local food movement, which has many, many benefits.
Now, obviously, there's a big climate difference in between Colorado and Florida. How did those communities tackle the issue of creating more of a localized food system? Is it really based around gardens and growing your own, or did some other things come out of that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's so many different things that can be done and need to be done. I think in both places, less than 1% of the food that's currently consumed is what I would call local, somewhere within a short drive where you could actually get to know your farmer. So there's a lot to be done in that area. And I think it's, pursuing all strategies at once to try to make this happen. In Sarasota, our first major project was the Suncoast Gleaning Project, which continues to run to this day. It was, rather than kind of a strategic initiative, it was somewhat opportunistic. We started with a farm where I had worked a couple seasons in the past, and I knew that they had a lot of produce that wasn't making it to market, that whole fields of vegetables would get tilled under in order to plant the next crop. So we partnered with our local food bank, and partnered with Jessica's Organic Farm, and we brought out groups of volunteers to harvest that surplus produce and donate it to benefit the food insecure in our community. And yeah, I think the first season we donated about 30,000 pounds of local organic produce, and it continued to grow every year after that. More farms getting involved, started getting into backyard, front yard, fruit tree gleaning, as well as produce rescue at local farmers markets. They have donated over 500,000 pounds of produce to date. And the Florida Department of Agriculture actually used the Suncoast Gleaning Project as a model for piloting gleaning projects statewide. So even kind of a small project like that can have these incredible, massive ripple effects. But we didn't stop there. We created an e-local resource guide and directory, kind of mapping our whole local food system for the first time, making it easier for people to find local farmers and tools, education to grow their own. We created an annual Eat Local week that brought together a couple dozen partners every year to put on a couple dozen events celebrating the best of local food and farming in our area and really helping to weave a local food movement together. And then started working on directing local investment into local food businesses, started looking at doing certification and branding scheme to combat local washing, doing a new study of our local food shed to demonstrate its massive economic impact. There was a study done in 2005, I believe, that showed that if we just, every Sarasota County resident bought just 10% of their food from a local farmer, that would add $80 million a year to our local economy.
Wow.
Bigger than any economic development plan on the table at that time. So those were the kind of things that we did during my time with Transition Sarasota. And it continues today. It's now called Community Harvest SRQ and still doing lots of good work.
Very cool. And I'm really glad we started with food because that's also been one of my points of focus in my own work in this area. But I also know that there are many different, often evolving challenges to create more sustainable communities. So going beyond food, what are some of the other more effective initiatives that you've seen or helped to get off the ground in your work?
Yeah, the Transition Towns movement also does a lot around creating a more resilient local economy. And that can take many, many forms, from very simple projects like setting up a repair cafe where you're bringing together people who know how to still fix things with people who need things fixed, keeping them out of the landfill, to much more complex and I think impactful initiatives like creating local complementary currencies, community-owned renewable energy companies, community-led redevelopment. Local investment is also a big theme. And some of these projects are huge. At one time, the Bristol pound was England's largest local currency, with well over £1 million in circulation, accepted at over 500 businesses there. The mayor took his full salary in Bristol pounds. You could get them from ATMs. You could use pay by text. So very sophisticated and really making a difference in prioritizing local businesses and keeping wealth circulating locally instead of being siphoned off back to corporate headquarters.
Yeah, I remember that story too, and I found it really inspiring, the idea of creating a financial mechanism that encouraged circulation within your own community and how much that was able to take off there. Now, going into your book, you talk in the beginning about how an evolutionary leap is necessary at this point, the incremental change. And yeah, we're at a point now where we can't just, do some small things and kind of ease our way out of this, but this is going to require a much bigger shift and a leap. Can you describe what you foresee as necessary? Something beyond just, or you use the analogy of, when fish first started to come out of water, or yeah. And that seems like something that we can't really affect, but you see it differently. How do you think we can participate in this evolutionary shift?
Well, I think at first it's stepping on an evolutionary path, having the courage to step out of merely cycling through our status quo routines and pretending that everything is normal. There's some massive challenges that we're facing right now. We know we're in the midst of 6 mass extinction on the planet. We're told that, if everybody lived like the average American, we would need 5.1 Earths to support us. The Paris Climate Agreement was only 10 years ago and set its goal at limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees C as a safe limit. And we've already surpassed that. Last year it was 1.6 degrees warmer than pre-industrial levels. And we see the effects of that all around us in these supercharged natural disasters that are hugely expensive. We also see, rise of authoritarianism around the world. There's a lot of very troubling signs, and I think, rather than to kind of wish that away or kind of normalize that, I think it's almost like the earth itself is calling us and saying that we need to wake up and do something different. So I think the first step is, embracing that reality and starting with a question, what can I do to help? What could I possibly do to help with whoever I am, with my interests, my background, my knowledge, my skills, the resources I have at my disposal. And it's going to be different for everybody. I don't believe that there's, a list of 10 things that if we do that, it's going to fix everything, or even 100 things. I think it's really about tapping deep into our authentic passion and care for the world and seeing where that's going to lead us. And we don't necessarily know at the beginning of that journey where it is going to take us. But I find that being on this path myself, that there's a certain synchronicity that starts to happen. And as Joseph Campbell says, doors open where you did not know doors were going to be. So, that's on the personal level. I think on the collective level, this idea of relocalization, community resilience, and regeneration are going to have to be our future. That living closer to home, producing more of what we need locally, relying more on community and less on consumption. Those are all clear trends, ways that we need to go in the face of ecological overshoot on a planet-wide scale, which has never happened before. So it is a radical break with the current direction or trajectory that society is on, which, as we know, is just consuming more and more and more all the time. Drill, baby, drill. But on the other hand, it's something that's very natural to human beings. Living in tight-knit local communities close to the earth is what we've done throughout 99% of our human history. It's really only been since, we've been able to exploit fossil fuels as incredibly dense, transportable, versatile energy resource that powered the Industrial Revolution and led to our world today, that we're cut off from others, that we're consuming way more than the earth can sustain. And I don't think that process has made us happier on the whole. I think in the process, we've lost a lot of what is most important in life, perhaps none more important than our integrity.
Indeed. And I've heard you talk in the past about the need for internal transition or internal regeneration before going out into the world and trying to make change happen in an external way. And it's also something that you address in the book. What do you refer to as internal transition or regeneration, and how can someone start on that path?
Yeah. Well, very early on in the transition movement, when Transition Town Totnes was just getting started, they were having a lot of meetings about peak oil and climate change and, how bad the world situation was getting. And an eco psychologist named Hilary Prentice attended one of these meetings and heard one of the speakers say, well, that's just the way it is. Human beings don't act until there's a crisis. And she said she felt that was a pretty dim view of what humanity was capable of. And so she went and talked to Rob Hopkins and floated this idea of having some kind of working group on the inner transition, what we now call the inner transition. It was called Heart and Soul at that time. And it was something that resonated with a lot of people. And so it's been passed on as just kind of part of the transition model. And it's not a new religion or, a spiritual tradition by any means. It's really, what kind of work do we need to do on ourselves to be the kind of leaders, the kind of people that the world needs at this pivotal point in time? And I don't think it's totally a sequential process, like, you have to do all your work and become fully enlightened, and then you can be an activist. But I do think it makes sense that before we run out into our community with our hair on fire, screaming that the end is coming, we do need to do some work on ourselves to make sure that our impact on the groups that we work with, on our wider community in the world, is something that's going to be positive on the whole. That doesn't mean that we aren't going to make mistakes, but it does mean that we're not completely driven by our own traumas, by our own neurosis, by, our own process of, projecting the world. So I think that there is a really strong case for the inner transition that, we start by building a strong foundation, and the foundation of systems change is individual. It's in the people that come together to make that kind of change.
Where do you see our collective awareness right now? Do you think that it is, I would say, matured or grown up since you started in the transition space? Do you see big differences between conversations or awareness within communities you speak with now to when you started?
Yes and no. So I would say some of the concepts that are involved in transition, the wider regenerative communities movement, are more commonplace. I think people, do understand, say, the benefits of regenerative agriculture, or, how serious the climate crisis is. But I also think that there's a lot that really has not penetrated mainstream consciousness yet. I don't think that people necessarily understand the limits to growth and where we are on a grand historical trajectory. I do think that, people understand there's something wrong. I've been blown away again and again, talking to people and having conversations about this kind of thing, people who don't necessarily think about this on a regular basis. And, when they're really comfortable and honest, most people will just say, yeah, we're fucked, basically. So there's some kind of awareness of that, but they don't really know exactly where it's coming from, what caused it, how we can possibly get out of this. And I think that leads to a lot of apathy, despair, inaction, because people, feel like things are going on the wrong track. I mean, there's been very pervasive polling on that issue here in the United States. And the vast majority, it's something like, 70% of people think that, that the United States is in decline. But, why is that? People have all sorts of different explanations. And one of the issues is that the truth is complicated. It does require that you learn some things and come to know some things and appreciate subtleties and paradox to see how we got to this point. And then on the other side, you have a guy in a red baseball cap yelling that it's all about the immigrants and all these murderers who are coming across the border to kill your daughter, and that he'll fix everything.
Yeah.
Lickety split as soon as he gets in office, if not sooner. And a lot of people are buying into that very simple, obviously untrue story of where we're at and how to fix the problems that we have. And I think one of the biggest things that those of us who are part of this kind of regenerative movement need to do is to find ways to get this story out there, that there is a viable alternative to the status quo and that it's already working in thousands of places around the world, to give people some real hope that there's something beyond just fighting over the scraps of late capitalism. Otherwise, I think we're in for some really serious trouble.
Yeah, and it's really easy to point to all of the things that are wrong, whether people intuit them or if they understand them on a more academic level or are experiencing them directly. But what you write about is all about going beyond just this overwhelm and apathy and seeing the opportunities in the moment, this crucial moment that we're living in. Can you talk to me about the 7 essential ingredients for creating transition and initiating a trajectory of regeneration within your life and your community?
Sure. Yeah. And I think we still have tremendous resources, tremendous opportunity to make changes. That may be less true the farther we go down the line, but it's certainly true right now. And yeah, the transition model is just one way to do that. I think it's a particularly brilliant way, hasn't been fully taken advantage of yet, but there's different ways to do it. Yeah, these 7 essential ingredients are an understanding of our global and local context. What are the issues that we're facing? How are they interconnected? What is the future likely to bring? That's really important. So we're not starting out by addressing the wrong issues, as we just talked about.
Or just fixing symptomatic things. There's a flip side.
We're just fixing symptoms or fixing problems in isolation from each other that create more problems in other parts of the system. Then we have a vision. We need to have some kind of clear idea of where we're headed. And that's this idea of relocalization of just and regenerative local communities. Then we have the inner transition, which we just talked about. And another kind of crucial foundation, which is healthy groups. I think the kind of leading cause of decline, dysfunction, and death among social change initiatives is just not being able to work together effectively, having difficulty making collective decisions, not having a common vision, allowing conflicts to go on unresolved, and eventually destroying the morale of the group. So there's a whole body of work around, how do we collaborate effectively outside of the hierarchical oppressive systems that we know so well. Then there's community engagement. We got to reach out. not only to the people who already think like we do, but at least eventually to those who don't, those who have been sitting on the sidelines, those who, are quietly despairing, watching the news every night at home. Yeah, I mean, I don't think we should waste too much time trying to convert people who are hardened against the kinds of things that we're trying to do. But we do have to get to some sort of critical mass, some kind of tipping point where these ideas are accepted by, 25%, 30% of the population. And then practical projects, probably the most important aspect, but it's also dependent on all those other ingredients that they're working well. Then we can do things like, build regenerative food systems and local economies and eliminate our dependence on fossil fuels, practice a deeper form of democracy, a more transformational form of democracy. And finally, ingredient number 7 is part of a movement. I think a lot of people who are drawn to this kind of work tend to be kind of anti-establishment leaning. But yeah, if we don't come together in some sort of recognizable way, some way that people who are outside of these movements can see and can say, oh, that thing, whether that be the regenerative communities movement or the transition movement or the permaculture movement, that's really working. They have a vision for the future when nobody else does. I think our local efforts will just be dismissed as, kind of, oh, so that town happened to do it. But no town is an island. We're all deeply interconnected. And so we need this to happen everywhere. So being part of a movement conveys lots of benefits to us. And, that is one of the main models of transition organizing. We sometimes refer to it as the transition animal, where the context is the mind and the vision is the eyes and the inner transition is the heart. The 4 legs are the healthy groups, the community engagement, the practical projects, and the part of a movement. And the point of that is that it's like they're all part of a single body. They all have to be kind of working together in concert for this transition animal to move, to run, to dance, to whatever. But there is still a question about, how do those ingredients evolve over time? Because, when you're starting out this kind of a thing, maybe with an all volunteer group, just a few of you, no track record, no mailing lists, no resources, funding, the opportunities available to you and what makes sense to do at that point is very different than when you're a more established entity, you're well known throughout the whole community, you have lots of great partners, you have, a number of successful projects that you can refer to. So yeah, there's a whole nother model that I've kind of brought back that was originally created by Rob Hopkins, the founder of Transition, but that I brought back in this book. It was mostly overlooked at the time, called The 5 Stages of Transition. And that's how those things evolve. How do we get from here, just starting out, not really knowing how to do this, not really having a lot of support, to actually fundamentally changing the direction of a local community?
I really love those steps, and I love the order that they're put in. They really make sense to me. And I'm curious though too, because I've had a lot of conversations recently with people who have made efforts at building intentional communities or even just creating community around them. And there has been a lot of feedback that they think that I'm not sure if it's like I don't live in the States anymore, but many people from Western Europe and the United States have commented that they think that we're at a place in our culture where people have lost the ability to live in real community as before, where close collaboration and interdependence haven't been a part of our lives at any point. I know it hasn't really for me. I mean, I've been fortunate enough to get windows into that in other communities around the world, but not really the ones that I grew up in. And to be honest, not really the one that I live in now. And have you seen antidotes for that? Have you seen a way back to going from a fairly selfish way of living where you're not really dependent on anyone because perhaps your economic resources allow you to be isolated much more than we have been in our past? Is there a way of going back and relearning those skills?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I've lived in intentional communities, co-op houses, where, there's a bunch of people living together under one roof, making decisions together about the community as a whole, oftentimes purchasing food together and sharing other resources. I think for, let's see, about 3 years, 3 years, 2 years, 2 years. So yeah, about a decade. Um, and I can definitely say that having time-tested systems definitely helps. So, being able to train everybody who lives in the community how to practice nonviolent communication or use consensus decision making or use a restorative justice process, um, how to divide up labor so that it's fair among everyone, even accounting for people's differences. I think, those are things that can be learned and put in place and, makes the rest easier. But still, we need practice. There's no combination of systems that is just going to do it for us. We actually have to really relearn how to relate to each other in community. So yeah, it's not easy, and I don't think that there's any real shortcuts to that. But one thing is, I don't know how we shift into a different paradigm without community. I think it's really key. It's at the foundation of all of this.
I definitely agree with that.
Two, I think there are huge rewards. If you're just measuring it by comfort and convenience, yeah, it's a little bit more inconvenient and it's a little bit more uncomfortable to live in community.
It's a lot more
But
compromise. There's a lot of taking other people's needs and wants into account and much less selfish decision making for sure.
yeah, and being really sensitive to other people's communication styles and other people's, yeah, preferences, and helping to see them through the difficult times. But, huge rewards too. You have a community that is dedicated to helping you through your toughest times. And I think one of the greatest benefits that's often cited from living in community is personal growth.
Mhm.
Uh, I think by always choosing the easy path, we've become kind of stunted as a culture. And I think, being willing to, um, what is the phrase from Brene Brown, rumble with vulnerability, I think causes us to become bigger people, more capable people, kinder, more compassionate people. And I think that, yeah, over time, we really do learn how to become good community members and that it's very possible, but we have to find ways to lean into it. And, it's not always. I'm actually living in a one-bedroom apartment now. I've been living in co-ops for the last 7 years and needed a little bit of a break. But yeah, it's something I'm deeply committed to over the long run because it really has deeply enriched my life.
Yeah, and I've seen so many different configurations. Obviously, you talk about the cooperatives and the intentional communities that you have experience with. I don't have as much experience with those, but I've had challenging and rewarding situations of cohabitation with friends on projects in other places. And there are, well, if I think back to the more traditional way that people used to live, they still had their private space. They still had their own homes and such. But if you look at the configurations of almost all of the villages around here in Spain where I live, there's sort of a nucleus within the town where everything is very close. I can only imagine how much people live with and on top of and around each other all the time. And the land that was cared for is on the peripheries, and people would come back and celebrate and do chores and all those things. And so this, this has been the configuration for communities for a really long time. Instead of having us all so spread out, and obviously that's really only possible with the transportation and the falsely cheap fuels that we enjoy right now. But it seems inevitable that we're going to come back to some sort of version of this. And the skills to be able to navigate and participate in those communities are probably best to be put into practice now so that it's not a very jarring adjustment when it becomes essential.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The more we do that, the better off we'll be. And something that I say in the book that I think is really crucial is that, we're not in for a smooth ride. I think that's pretty certain at this point. So we're going to face some bigger challenges ahead, maybe bigger challenges than, we ever even expected to face in our life. If people turn towards each other in the midst of that, I think, we'll get through this. But if we turn against each other, make each other to be the problem and try to hang on to what we have, that will be absolutely disastrous. So I think that's one of the most important things to keep in mind going forward.
Yeah, I think that's very wise insight there. And Don, before we wrap things up, can you tell our listeners how they can find your book and where they can learn more about your work in the transition movement?
Yeah. So the book was published last June, 2024 by New Society Publishers. So you can find it through their website. That's what I always recommend, particularly for folks in the US and Canada. It can get pretty expensive to ship cross-continental. So if you are in the UK or you're in Europe, there's a few bookstores that stock it there. If you have to, I suppose you could buy it from Amazon, but I'm not encouraging that. There's also an ebook format. So if you want to do it that way, you could, no matter where you are in the world, you can purchase it from New Society, which is the best. I do have a website, which is still very new and fledgling, but I'm adding to it all the time. It's evolutionarychange.org. And there's blogs there. You can link to my YouTube channel, which has a number of recordings of talks that I've given, interviews, some on different subjects than this. And then transitionnetwork.org, which is the international support hub for the Transition Towns movement, has a incredible wealth of resources and trainings that are available there.
Marvelous. Well, Don, I really appreciate you putting all these years of experience and knowledge into another volume that is sure to be inspiring and give actionable steps for people looking to start their own transition journeys, both inside and outside. And I will be sharing the links to the book, and we'll probably do a giveaway with New Society on this as well. So there will be a lot of opportunities for our listeners to connect with your book there. Thank you so much for taking the time. This was a really fun conversation. I hope we can catch up again soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Oliver. Always a pleasure.
Now, before we wrap this up, just remember that these episodes are only the beginning of the learning resources, design and coaching services, in-person courses, and interactive community that are available through Regenerative Skills. The Discord server is our free community where you can connect with other like-minded listeners, exchange ideas, stories, tips, and resources, as well as interact with me directly and quite a few former guests from this show. Our Instagram account at regen_skills is the best place to see the projects that me and the team are working on, both for clients and collaborators as well as on our own properties. I'll also be announcing the certification courses, workshops, and gatherings that we've got coming up later this year. If you're interested in getting dedicated support for your own project, you can now schedule a free planning session with one of our team members through the request form on our website. You can also find all the links, show notes, and past resources there at regenerativeskills.com. We truly believe that no matter your experience, your knowledge, abilities, resources, or background, you can be a powerful force for regeneration on this planet, and we're here to help you find your path. So as always, remember to keep taking those little steps every day towards a regenerative future, and I'll be right by your side along the way.